There we go. And we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another live stream of on.net Live. My name is Cecil Phillip, and today we're going to be learning how you can plug in Tailwind CSS instead of your Blazor application. And I have my friend here, Chris, who's going to talk to us all about it. So, Chris, why don't you really quick, introduce yourself to folks and let them know a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thanks for having me. It's very nice to be here. So for everybody, my name is Chris Sainty. I'm a principal software engineer at a startup in London called Deployed. I've been a .NET engineer for 15 or 16 years now. I'm a Microsoft MVP for 3 years, I think now it's getting on for. And I've been kind of really sort of deeply entrenched in Blazor for quite a while now, sort of since before the first preview came out, I think, really. Kind of fell in love with it pretty much straight away, and been blogging about it and doing talks about it and everything ever since. As well as that, what else? I also do a bit of open source work as well. So I've got some Blazor specific open source packages. They're all under an organization called Blazored. And I'm writing a book on Blazor for Manning called Blazor in Action. So I think that's everything.
Nice.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were writing a book too. That's awesome.
I know. I didn't even think to mention that earlier. I probably should have done.
But that's good to know, though, right? Like, what is the book coming out?
I really, really hope just after .NET 6 lands. So I've been working on it for a year because I think everybody who's written a book knows that you think it will take about a year and then it takes about 18 months. So that's pretty much part of the course, I think. And then we've had a chat. Me and my development editor, we were kind of talking and saying, like, this might land like a month or two before .NET 6, like in terms of the rate we're going. And like that would be really rubbish to publish a book based on .NET 5 a few months before .NET 6 comes out. So we had a chat and we were like, well, we'll kind of aim for just before November. We'll get all the proof checks done, and we'll kind of code and write against the kind of later .NET 6 previews, and hopefully not too much will change, and we can go live then with the book. We can print the book just after .NET 6 comes out, fingers crossed. So it should be nice and up to date as a book can be, really, for everybody. So that's the plan. Watch this space to see if it happens. It should work out.
What did you say the title of the book was again? Is it Blazor in Action? Or?
Blazor in Action, yeah. So it's part of Manning's In Action series. So other books from that, a good MVP friend of mine, Andrew Locke, has got a book, ASP.NET Core in Action, for example. So it's part of that series. They do loads. They do like React in Action, Vue.js in Action. There's loads of them. But it's basically like a sort of more realistic, real world version of a book rather than just kind of theory. So we try and tackle more real world issues. So how would you build a real app using this technology? Yeah.
Got it. That makes sense. Awesome. Well, so we're gonna look out for that book later this year after .NET 6 comes out. But speaking of things that come out, before we really start diving into Blazor and Tailwind CSS, because I know that's what everyone here is here for, I do have some links I want to show because a couple of things happened today that I think everyone kind of wants to know about.
So a couple of little things.
Yeah, just a couple little things. So I'm going to add my desktop to the screen, and let's kind of go through some of these things. Now, it seems like this has been a really busy month for Blazor in general. So our friends at Telerik just did Blazing into the Summer 2.0 with Telerik. And I think this was last week. And there's tons of great stuff here, right? Dan Roth did some sessions. Layla Porter. I love Layla. If folks know who Layla is, she does a lot of great stuff.
I know Layla. She's awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, Layla's awesome, man. She did a session on Signalar with Blazor. Again, like the B unit folks were here and they did a little bit about unit testing with Blazor. So again, this already... Yeah, he's awesome, man. So again, this happened last week, but the recordings are all available. So if you didn't get to see it or if you never heard about it, definitely go ahead and kind of scroll through the page here on Telerik and definitely check these out. And who's this guy? It looks like I was here too. Yeah. Like I did a session as well with Ed. We also spoke about creating Blazor components. So yeah, just a lot of great free content. It's all on YouTube today, but if you kind of want to get a curated view, I'll share this link in the chat where you can kind of scroll through this page and see some of these other sessions about Blazor. Now, moving on a little bit more recently, actually just today or earlier this morning, depending on where you live, it was Blazor Day, right? And so the community puts on this event, I think like once a year, I believe, because the last one was about 11, 12 months ago.
That's it, yeah.
And it is, yeah, about 12 months ago. And so they had all of these great sessions with just a lot of different folks like, you see Carol was here, Sam was here. I think Sam also works on Telerik, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Sam works for Telerik, yeah.
Does he? Good. And just a lot of folks just talking about Blazor, right? Like Blazor and GraphQL, this guy, I don't know who this guy is, but apparently he did a session too. Talk something about full-on forms with Blazor, some stuff.
I heard it was rubbish. He didn't know what he was talking about.
I mean, I don't know. He's talking about some stuff. I don't know. And then this other guy that's here, Jeff Fritz. So again, we have tons of folks talking about all this Blazor content. So again, this was today. I think if you want to see it, I believe you can hit this live button that's at the top, if I'm not mistaken. And then you can just rewatch the entire day. Now, I don't believe that they've split it up yet into little sections where you have like those bookmarks in YouTube where you could just fast forward to the section, but I'm sure that'll be there eventually. But again, if you want to go and see some of these sessions, those are available here on YouTube. You could go check those out. Now, for the announcements, some of y'all may or may not already know this. Visual Studio 2022 Preview 1 is available today, right now for Windows devices. So if you kind of want to know what's new and what's going on in the world of Visual Studio 2022, definitely head over here and check it out. I know one of the big things people are talking about is the fact that it's 64-bit. Right. Yeah, so, meaning it's going to be able to use more memory and hopefully it'll be a little bit faster too. So
you can load those solutions with 1,000 projects in now without any problems at all.
Yeah, I think there might be like a video or a little GIF about it.
Yeah, there was. I've definitely seen that already. Like it is very impressive.
Yeah, I think this is it. If you kind of look at it. Yeah, look at it. So it's loading like 1,600 packages super quick. And then, it has like IntelliCode built in and like all this other stuff. The Maui stuff is all built in there too. So again, if this is something you're interested in, this is a preview release. This is not the final release. So definitely go ahead, check out the blog post and see what are some of those other features that it added into it. download it on your machine, because you could run Visual Studio now side by side without worrying about it messing up like the other version you have on your machine. And try it out and let us know, right? I think one of the main reasons to do these previews is so that we could get early feedback, right? So let us know, I like this, I don't like this, this works, this doesn't work. If you're an extension author, you might want to port over your extensions and see how it kind of feels in this new world. And open your new solutions and stuff and see how those work. But again, this is a good way before the final one comes out, let everyone know, well, hey, this works for me or not. And Chris, actually, I have a question for you. Are you like the type of person that like installs preview bits on your machine? I kind of feel like you are a little bit.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've lived on preview bits for far too long. I think I didn't have a stable version of probably .NET Core or Visual Studio installed on my machine for probably best part of 18 months while Blazor was coming up to GA. It was just preview after preview after preview. It's what I think always amazes me is the quality of the previews. It's very rare that you get a preview that is just unusable or is constantly crashing. I think we hear preview and we always think, oh, it's really unstable, or it might be really rough, and that just isn't usually the case. I won't say absolute, because there's always the odd one that goes a bit wrong, but even they get corrected so quickly with a little patch and stuff. I comfortably went for best part of 18 months without any stable, in quote, software and in Visual Studio and stuff, and it worked so well.
Yeah, I think after a while of releasing these previews so often, like we're starting to get it right. Like we're starting to figure out a comfortable way to do it without like making everybody get mad. So again, if you folks that are watching, like definitely go ahead and download the new preview of Visual Studio 2022.
And they go side by side as well. So that's the other cool thing, because you can have the table with it.
Exactly. Yeah. So now you can have like, I don't know, maybe you're using 2019, or you're using whatever version you have right now, and then you could put 2022 next to yours, and then you don't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah.
Now, along with Visual Studio, we also have new versions of .NET 6. So .NET 6 Preview 5 is out. Our good friend Richard Lannard, he always does like these really comprehensive blog posts about what specifically happened. So definitely, I'm not going to read through all of these, but you could check it out and see what's going on and what's new here. Along with this, there's new versions of ASP.NET Core, EF Core, and also .NET MAUI. So you can kind of see what are some of the new things that were released for .NET MAUI. I know everyone's like super into like the new hot reload features that are happening across the workloads. Lots of performance improvements for EF Core as well. So again, definitely check those out too. And then also with .NET, with ASP.NET Core 6, I know we have support for the new minimal APIs, updated support for .NET Watch, and being able to install these different workloads and all kinds of tool stuff. Like there's too much for us to talk about in this little bit of time that we have to cover these links. But again, I'll share these links in the chat and folks could check it out. And again, these are just previews, so let us know what you think so we can make sure that whenever this release happens later this year in November, that these things will be good to go.
Definitely.
Now, with that being said, my screen is going to come off because this is the time that I always say, hey, this is not my show. This is Chris's show today. And we're going to kind of dive into his topic and learn a little bit more about Tailwind CSS in Poland. But super quick too, like I'm looking in the chat. I also love to make sure that I always shout out people that are here that are watching us. Looks like we have some folks here from Turkey. We have someone here from Poland. Thank you all so much for watching us. Who else do we have in here really quick?
I think we got Is it Costa Rica as well? Did I see?
Yeah, we have someone here from Costa Rica. Yeah, I see that. Yeah. Someone's here from Romania. So we have people from all over the place watching us. So again, really appreciate y'all coming in and spending time with us. As you have questions, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat, and I'll make sure we answer them. We try and weave them in a comfortable way. Oh wow, we got Egypt, Pakistan, Portugal. Yeah, we got tons of folks here. So
Nigeria. Wow.
Yeah, from Iran. We got some folks from Cuba. Nigeria, yeah, we love it, man. Morocco, Canada. Now the flood. I just opened up the floodgates. Now everyone's like, don't forget my country, else you're gonna get in trouble, Cecil. Yeah, Australia, Sweden. There we go. So again, yeah, I definitely appreciate all y'all joining us today. Chris, so the reason why we're having this conversation today is because every year I do this thing, right, where I'm like, what are the technologies that I'm going to focus on for the next 12 months? So, like how people have New Year's resolutions, I have like learning plans, right? And
Yeah.
so like this is the stuff that I want to learn, because I always find there's so many little things for me to try and understand in technology, and it's always like shifting. Like I need to be able to focus. And so this year I was like, I'm going to learn Blazor, I'm going to learn GraphQL, I'm going to learn Kubernetes, right? So far I feel pretty comfortable with like the Kubernetes thing, and I'm still working on my GraphQL skills. But this month just happens to be Blazor month on .NET Live TV. And as you can see from like those links earlier, we had tons of folks doing some other things from Telerik, and then we had the Blazor Day events, and there's going to be tons more stuff happening this month. But, one of the questions I got from a lot of folks was, how do you plug in CSS frameworks inside of Blazor? Because now like CSS frameworks are a little bit different to how they used to be. Now there's build systems and NPM has to get involved, and there's all this stuff that has to happen just for me to like style my application and use like the framework I want to use. So obviously I wanted to bring you on because I know you're a fan of Tailwind CSS. So I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about like how that works. And maybe as a beginning, why don't we just talk about what Tailwind CSS is, and then kind of like just roll into it from there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great place to start. Cool. So in a nutshell, Tailwind CSS, why is it different to other frameworks like Bulma or probably the most commonly used one, which is Bootstrap? The difference is it's a utility-based CSS framework. Now, what that means is that we don't actually sort of need to go off and write traditional CSS classes. What we do is we apply lots of micro CSS classes to an element in order to style it, and we style it by adding all of these classes to it that do very specific things. So the homepage is tailwindcss.com. I've got this here because they have an amazing, as you probably expect from a CSS framework, they have an amazing design for their site. And this bit is really cool. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to refresh this. And they've got this little animation that's styling it. And as they go, they're typing in all of these utility classes that are making very specific styling changes to that element on the left-hand side. And as they do that, you can kind of build up this unique style for this particular component. The reason why I have a really big love for Tailwind CSS is because it does allow you to create something that looks a little bit different with a lot of the kind of help you get from a CSS framework like Bootstrap, for example. So one of the great things about Bootstrap is like they deal with things like the cross-browser issues, like where, CSS is getting a lot better now, but, where you used to have to do lots of very specific hacks because, spacing on IE was different to spacing on Safari to Chrome, and you'd need to know browser-specific prefixes or very specific CSS hacks in order to make everything look the same across browsers. So one of the reasons to use a CSS framework is it takes that away from you. It does all of that hard work for you, and you can kind of just get on with doing it. And that's still true of Tailwind. Even though we're using these kind of utility classes, they've still got all of that functionality built into them. They still deal with all the cross-browser functionality for you and whatever else. But like I say, the difference really is that fact that with Bootstrap, you have to take this hunk of HTML that's predefined with all of the CSS classes that are predefined, and then you drop that in your app, and it's there, and it looks like it looks in their style guide. But that's kind of the problem for me. Then everything starts to look like Bootstrap. And yeah. I don't get me wrong, and I have no hate for Bootstrap. I've used it for a long time, and it's an amazing framework, and it's really good. And of course, you can customize it. But where I think as well, another big advantage is for Tailwind is in when you're working in, when you are building real production apps, and you maybe do have a design team and things like this, where they do want very granular control over the look and feel of your app, but you still want to get that the cross-browser benefits of frameworks and all this kind of stuff. This is, again, where Tailwind for me really works well, because you can work with your designer. Tailwind's very configurable. So has a set of really good defaults for things like spacing of elements and sizing and things like this, but you can customize all of that, so you can make it match your designer's your designer's kind of presets, if you like, and you can mimic it, and then you can just kind of have it completely tailored to your design system for your application, and you know that you can just go applying these utility classes, knowing that they work based on how your design system should work, and everything will be spaced appropriately, and all this type of stuff. And you can just really iterate on design very quickly. It's really good for like rapid prototyping, like that little animation that ran here to kind of style this out. You can literally just keep whacking in these utility classes and watching them build up, and the styles change as you go. And it's that really quick feedback, rather than kind of go in a style sheet, write loads and loads of kind of properties into a CSS class, refresh, does that? Oh no, that doesn't. I'll tweak that class, and then I'll tweak this class, that property, this property. Oh, it hasn't quite targeted the right element. I'll change my CSS selector and all that kind of stuff. You kind of don't have to worry about that with Tailwind. So hopefully that's kind of given you a rambling overview of why I quite like it.
Sure. And I kind of like what you said in the beginning. At least I kind of relate to it. At some point in time, like a lot of sites all look like Bootstrap. So it became to the point that even as a developer, or even folks that aren't developers, you could look and be like, oh, okay, this site looks like this one. Like the buttons are the same, or the borders are the same, or everyone's using like that same hero thing, the big banner thing that's at the top of the page. Like the structure all looks the same. So they must be using like similar things to build a site. So I'm guessing what you're saying, Tailwind now gives it a little bit more, is a little bit more flexible in terms of being able to customize it and control what pieces of it, not only what they look like, but what pieces of the framework I actually use and what actually go into whatever my final product is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll see this in a second when we start like looking at how we can use it in our Blazor app. But again, with something like Bootstrap, you're used to kind of having this sort of big style sheet that you include in your app that's got all of these styles in, whether you use them or not. One of the other big advantages of using Tailwind is because it's utility based, you can trim out all of the classes that you don't need when you go like and build your app for production. So you can get a really, really small CSS file at the end of it. So they talk about this in the documentation, but essentially when you're in development mode and you have access to all of those utility classes while you're developing, your CSS might be somewhere in the region of anywhere between 4 and possibly up to 20 meg, depending on how much of the framework you enable. Yeah. But rarely does an app that uses Tailwind, rarely does it go to production with CSS above 10K.
Right.
Because when you strip it all down to just what you need, you can get these, let's say, very, very small files. So that's another sort of nice benefit of it, that you can do that.
Nice. And we have some questions popping in. This one's coming in from Twitch right now. And the person's asking, what would you say is the learning curve compared to Bulma or Bootstrap? I haven't tried Bulma, but I know Bootstrap wasn't too bad over time.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really interesting question, because I think the answer to it will depend on possibly what your skills are as a UI designer and things like this, because in terms of getting up and running, hopefully I'm going to show you that today. So hopefully that is going to take all of the mystery around how you get running with Tailwind and how you can use it in your, build it for production versus development time and all this kind of stuff. In terms of using it, well, that's trickier, because it's just, like say, lots and lots of these utility classes and putting them together in a way that looks the way you want it to look. And you need to know how you want it to look, and then you can get there with the styles. I guess the biggest learning curve, if anything, with it is kind of understanding the naming convention for all of these utilities, because it looks probably quite scary. I mean, I think we could probably, like, if I zoom in, like right in here, you can see kind of what the kind of mix of all these utilities look like. And it probably looks a bit gobbledygooky, like it looks like loads of random characters and numbers, but actually they all kind of mean things. So if we just kind of look through this, and I'll maybe zoom in a couple more times as well. If we just look at this as an example, we've got this MD and then a colon flex. And what that's saying is on a medium responsive viewport, use Flexbox. The background should be gray at level 100, and there's like 8 or 9 levels of sort of shade for gray that you can pick from. So this is a very light gray. They get darker the higher the number goes up. So 900 is the darkest. Rounded XL means that it's got rounded corners, and they're very rounded because it's XL. P-8 means it's a padding that goes all the way round that's 8, and that corresponds to a rem number, and you can customize what 8 means. So that very much depends on how you configure it. And then what it's also saying here is on a medium breakpoint, it actually has no padding. So you can see that once you kind of understand what these kind of shorter terms all mean, you can actually very quickly kind of fire these in and get a very you can get your style starting to your elements starting to take shape quite quickly. But it does take a little while just to kind of understand the naming and remember all of these names. The good thing is when you're using something like Visual Studio or you're using VS Code or JetBrains Rider, they've all got kind of IntelliSense for this. And again, right at the end, I'll talk a little bit about VS Code and JetBrains Rider, because they've actually got Tailwind specific plugins that make this really easy. There isn't one for Visual Studio, but Visual Studio's got very good IntelliSense for CSS anyway, so it picks most of it up. So yeah, that's what I'd say anyway.
Awesome. And we got a bunch of questions in here that are asking about like customizing Tailwind. So I think what we'll hold off to those, because I'm guessing you're gonna get into like, how to do that a little bit later on. But yeah. One question that I thought was interesting that I figured I would ask you now before we move forward was, this one is coming in from YouTube, and the person's asking, is Tailwind faster than Bootstrap while HTML is being rendered? Now, I'm not a CSS guru, I suppose, but like, I don't know how to measure performance for CSS frameworks. I guess that depends on like the complexity of the rules, I suppose. So yeah, like, do you know how to answer that question?
That's a really interesting. I don't think I've ever done that. I don't think I've ever measured that kind of thing. I would expect there's probably no difference, because ultimately these are utility classes, but ultimately they're still CSS styles that are in a style sheet the style sheet has to be loaded, and then obviously the page will be styled. So the regular kind of browser rules would apply. So if your production minified Tailwind CSS file is significantly smaller than a Bootstrap CSS file, for example, and you maybe have a user on a slow connection, the CSS file will download quicker, therefore the styles will be rendered quicker. So I guess from that perspective, Tailwind is probably always going to be slightly quicker in that very kind of niche scenario. I think for most people who are on like a broadband connection or 4G or any kind of remotely decent connection, I think both of them, the files are still so small that really you're probably not going to really notice much of a difference.
Yeah, and I figured that the like you said, like the differences are probably minuscule, but it probably would be interesting if someone that's familiar with like performance optimization or measuring render times across different sites do that. I know like the Chrome developer tools or the Edge developer tools have like some performance measuring things in there, particularly when it comes to rendering time. So maybe it might be interesting if anyone's familiar with that type of stuff. Show us how you could measure that, and we could do like a apples to oranges comparison of what those things kind of look like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Cool.
Right, so what do we go ahead and move on, and like maybe you could show us like how do we get started, like kind of plugging this stuff in, because I think that's what most folks want to know about.
Yeah, let's start at the beginning. Let's get going, and how do we actually get it? So I'm going to show you this first of all, right? Because this looks ugly at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this look decent, hopefully. And when I say decent, I'm saying that with a pinch of salt, because basically what we're going to do is use Tailwind to reimagine what the Blazor file new project template could look like. So this is basically the file new Blazor project. I've stripped out all of the Bootstrap stuff that ships by default with that template, and I've basically gotten it ready for Tailwind. Now, I've already applied a lot of Tailwind styling, but what I've not done is actually set up Tailwind with this project yet. So we'll do that together now to understand what's going on. So once we've done that, this should come alive with a much nicer view rather than this very plain view that we've got right now. So if we go over to Visual Studio, this is the index page. So this is the home page for the template. You can see already some Tailwind styles going on here. You can see this utility stuff. Like I say, it's not working at the moment because Tailwind's not there. So I'm going to walk you through the steps of getting this set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder in this project. And I'm just going to call it styles. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm specifically keeping it out of that www root folder. And the reason I'm going to do that is because this isn't going to be this is basically a bit like a source file. This is a CSS file that's going to get compiled by Tailwind's build system into a final CSS file that will be put into our www root folder and will get shipped with our application. So I'm going to add a style sheet now. And it's about here. And I'm just going to call this app.css. Cool. So I'm going to pop some directives in here. So these are Tailwind directives. And believe it or not, these 3 lines of code are going to generate quite literally hundreds, if not possibly thousands of utility classes. And that's going to be done by Tailwind's build system. We can also add our own styles in here, and I'm going to come back to that later and talk about that specifically. But for right now, these are the 3 lines that we need to put into this CSS file. So we've got
really quickly for folks that aren't like CSS ninjas. Is that valid CSS, or is that like some Tailwind specific functionality that's happening there?
Yeah, this is Tailwind's bit. I'll be honest, I don't actually know if this is technically valid CSS.
Yeah, it's
certainly Visual Studio is unsure about what's going on here, which it kind of should be, because this is going to be what Tailwind uses to deal with this is an npm package called post CSS, which is a CSS processor, and that's what understands what this directive means. So yeah, it's a good question. If that's, I expect it probably is valid, just because I find that most people who are building frameworks like this in front end communities tend to usually do things. Yeah, they don't tend to break the standards too much. So, but I don't know for sure. So don't quote me on that.
Okay, so because that kind of answers a question that we had in the chat as well, and Joseph was asking, does Tailwind use Sass or something of that effect to kind of convert things over to CSS?
So Tailwind doesn't use Sass itself. What you can actually use Sass with Tailwind, as in, like I say, I'll come back to this a little bit later. But if I wanted to add my own, because I can mix pre-made CSS classes. So I can do like the traditional create a new CSS class and put in my properties and then reference it in my code. I can do that. Tailwind doesn't stop me doing that. And if I wanted to use Sass with those styles, I could, and it will still work with Tailwind. And they do have a section on their documentation about how you work with the Sass build system to run, because you run Sass, you run your Sass build system first, output your CSS, then the Tailwind build system would run and bundle that in with all the utility styles. But that's on their documentation. So I think it's like docs.tailwindcss.com. And that kind of explains that there.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. So we've got our app CSS file. So the next thing we're going to do is something that I know makes .NET developers shudder slightly. I'm going to add a package JSON file. Okay.
Oh, there's Node in here. Okay.
We're going into like npm and Node and stuff. So let me just get that in here first. So I'm going to add a new item. And I'm going to just add in, I suppose it could be any JavaScript file, to be fair, or JSON file even.
Yeah, there's a JSON file. There you go. And you know, to be fair, I think we've all accepted now, like 2020, 2021, that like you can't do web development without Node.js. I think it's just like we've accepted it. It is what it is. You know what I mean? At some point in time, it's going to show up somewhere, whether it's using Webpack or like Tailwind CSS or some type of build utility to transform our TypeScript, JavaScript, CSS, Sass, whatever. At some point, we're going to need to use Node.js. So we just, we should just get comfortable with the idea.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I'll be honest, I don't know if it's got to used it a while. I just don't find it that scary. I understand. I think I understand when you're coming from the .NET world, especially because obviously our back-end tooling is so good. It possibly can feel a bit it can feel a bit weird, but I think it's just different approaches because it tackles different problems and stuff. And ultimately, the front end tooling is still just light years ahead of where we are at the moment. Specifically here, talking with Blazor, because as .NET, Blazor's our foot into that front end world, and we've only barely put our foot down at the moment. Like we're so new into this, and I'm sure our tool, we will see tools come out of the .NET community that possibly help with some of this stuff and things, but. Hopefully, what we're going to show you today will show that it's really not that scary, and I can hopefully convince you it's not too bad. So we'll see how I go.
Right.
So what I'll do is quickly just mention. So this is basically just going to bring in a few npm packages for us. So I've got some dev dependencies here. So the kind of key ones that you need when you're first setting up Tailwind are these four at the bottom. This one here is for something very specific that I'm going to talk about in a second, a little bit later, sorry. But these are the four you need, which is Tailwind CSS and Post CSS CLI, Post CSS, and Auto Prefixer. And again, this is all documented in Tailwind's Getting Started guide, so you can kind of go and see what goes on there. The other thing that I've got in this package JSON file is a build script. So I've got this script section in here. I've got this build CSS dev script, and that uses post CSS. And what I do is I pass it that app CSS file that we've just created with those Tailwind directives in it. And then I say to it, I want to output the kind of finished version into my www root folder css app.css. And that's going to output that compiled CSS file at the end of it. So that's what's going on in that file. Hopefully it doesn't look too scary and hopefully makes sense. So the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to add a JavaScript file this time. So I'm going to add a post CSS config. Like so. And I'll pop some code in here. Now, this is all you really have to do in this file. All it does is it configures post CSS to use Tailwind CSS plugin for it, which basically allows it to know what that @Tailwind directive was all about in that source CSS file. So that's kind of all that's going on there, and some setup for auto prefixer and things. We can kind of save that off, and we can kind of forget about that now. We don't need to worry too much about that. The final thing we're going to do is create a Tailwind config file as well. So let me pop that in there.
Okay, and so then kind of as you're doing that, kind of just to recap, so you have Tailwind installed, right? So it's installed using npm, and then kind of just going through that Tailwind documentation, there's some like utility things you need to get. Like, so you got the post CSS thing, there's the I think it's called auto fixer or auto prefixer, right? And then now what you're doing, pretty much you're just setting up configuration files now. So you have your package.json, which brings in the npm packages, but then now you have to configure Tailwind and you have to configure the post CSS. So that's why you have those two additional files, right? Like the Tailwind config file, and then it was also the post CSS config file.
Yeah, exactly correct. Yeah, exactly. So we'll be visiting this Tailwind config CSS a couple more times as we go along, because we can use this file to literally customize every single part of Tailwind. So we can literally customize anything we want about it. And what's also really cool about Tailwind, which I did mention earlier, is that if there's something that you want that it doesn't do out of the box. There's plugins as well. It has a plugin model, and there's like loads of really cool plugins that some of them are just really cool for dev. So like you can get one that will display on your in your web browser the media query that you're at. So as you resize your browser, it will always display what level of media query. So when you're doing like that MD : utility that I showed earlier, where it's like on a medium breakpoint, you can see if you're on a medium breakpoint or not, and if that style's applied, and whether you want to maybe change that to a different breakpoint size and things like that. You can do other stuff, and I'll show one later that does like some text shadowing and things like that. So it's got, like I say, it's got loads of cool stuff to it. But anyway,
Nice.
to get us going, this is the basic config. This is all we need to do. We just kind of put these bits in, and that's it. Now I've done all this copy and pasting. You can actually do this with the command line as well if you prefer with the command line. I mean, I think like me and you were talking earlier, I sort of mentioned I actually work daily on a Mac, so I'll be honest, I use a terminal a lot. So you can do like temp. There's some npm commands you can run that generates these files for you, so you don't actually have to do them. But it's whatever you're comfortable with. So that's the npm side of it and the JavaScript kind of toolchain bits. But what I'm going to do now is show you how we can integrate it with kind of our .NET stuff, so that we don't have to run like separate npm build commands and all this kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my CS proj file, and we're going to add in some new build targets here. So I'm going to pop in a kind of chunk of code here, and I'm going to work through this. And I just want to be clear before we start that I'm by no means like a king of MSBuild targets and all of this kind of stuff. This largely is very confusing to me, and I've kind of cobbled this together through reading documentation, Stack Overflow, and various bits of blog posts and bits and bobs. So if there are any gurus of MSBuild tasks and things, they might find a more succinct way of doing this, but this seems to work fairly well. So yeah. So I just want that disclaimer in there. But anyway, so what I've done is there's 3 targets in here, and they're going to run sequentially. So, and all of these 3 are going to run before the main build of our project runs. So the first one that's going to run is this first one called check for npm. So what this is going to do is it's going to run a command npm -v, which is going to print out the npm version in a terminal. Now, what happens here is if that errors because npm isn't installed, it's going to create this error, and then there's a check here to say that basically if we have an error, then we're going to stop the build, and we're going to say print out this kind of message to say that you must install npm to build this project. So that's kind of like step 1 for, you know, if you've got this on a developer's machine who hasn't installed Node and npm, just to stop, because it obviously can't be built. If that one passes and everything's good there, the next one that's going to run is this npm install. So this avoids us having to go to the command line and run npm install or anything like that. It's just going to run automatically when we build our project. Now, this is going to rely on something else as well. This is going to rely on an output from another part we need to add in here, which I'm going to do this now, actually, before I forget. So I'm just going to come up here. I'm going to add in this npm last install. What this is going to do is basically when npm install runs, it's going to create this file .last install, and it's just going to create it. It's an empty file, doesn't have anything to it, but it's basically just going to be used to check when the last time npm install was run, and it's going to compare that against our package JSON, and it's going to say if the package JSON hasn't been updated since we last ran, or since that .last install file was modified, then we don't need to run the npm install. There's nothing's changed. If we have updated our package JSON file, then it will rerun npm install, because we might have added some new dependencies, and it will then download them for us. So that's kind of what's going on there.
So that's kind of interesting, and I've actually never seen that before. So is that something we just have by default, or did you have to like install a thing to get that?
So this is all MSBuild magic right now. This particular method I found on a Stack Overflow post when I was Googling about how do you run npm as part of the .NET build system, basically. and someone mentioned this technique. So I feel really bad that I don't know who that was, because I'd love to give them credit. I just want to be clear that I've not come up with some genius way of doing this. This is traditional good development, Stack Overflow development right here.
Stack Overflow, copy paste. I get it.
Exactly. So what I did do, though, like any good Stack Overflow copy and paste, is I immediately went to the docs to understand what each bit did, so that at least I knew what my copy and pasted code was doing. So when I'm on a show like this, I can actually explain it rather than just go, "Oh, it works. Don't worry about it." But yeah, it's really. I was actually really impressed that you could do this. I didn't have a clue that you could do this kind of stuff. So it's really cool.
Nice.
So at this point, we've now got all of our NPM packages installed for us. So the final thing that's going to happen is the build CSS target is going to run. And that's just going to do one thing. It's going to execute that build CSS dev command that was in the script section of the package.json file. So if we go back over here, this script here that is going to build that app CSS file and generate our final CSS from the Tailwind build system. So that's just going to get executed, and that's just going to be done by calling npm run and then the name of that script. So at that point, that should be it. That should now allow us to hit build on Visual Studio, and it now should do our npm install, then run our build script and output our Tailwind CSS file.
Okay. So then, and then while you're doing that and having that build, so would you say, at least for this part of it, this is pretty standard, right? This is standard, setup. Because I saw some folks in the chat and they were asking, wow, can this just be a template? And can we just do file new Tailwind with Blazor or Blazor Tailwind and then just have this?
Yeah, I mean, there's if people Google, there's a couple of people who have created Tailwind templates. Because obviously now with the template system in .NET is really easy to create templates. Essentially, you can just kind of create a new solution, modify it however you want, and essentially, I think you just put in like a template.json file, and that's kind of like all you need to do to make it a template, and then you can install them with the .NET CLI, and you can package them, put them on NuGet and things like this. So I think there's some already out there. I actually keep toying with adding one to my Blazored packages, where all of this work is already pre-done. So you can just do, if you want to use Tailwind with Blazor, basically what I'm showing you would already be pre-done for you. So yeah, I might, if there's enough, if people are really interested in that, I'll probably put that together, because I've basically already got it. I just need to add a template JSON file. So yeah, I can look at that. But if we jump back to our output window, we can kind of see that things should have kind of worked. So if I zoom down here, you can see that in our build output, you can see that that npm-v command has printed out the version of Node that I've got running on my, or npm that I've got on my machine here. You can see that we're calling that build CSS dev command there with post CSS, and that's all being done. So everything's been outputted kind of like as we expected, which is kind of good. So fingers crossed, like this has worked, hopefully. So we have a CSS folder, we have a CSS file, and hopefully if we open this up, there we go. We have a lot of CSS now. Nice. So as I said, those 3 lines that we added into that other file.
Whoa, that is a lot of CSS.
Yeah, 187,000 lines.
That's a megaton of CSS.
So that's a lot of stuff. So if we just take a look at this, because this is definitely worth looking at for before we look at things later. I've just got my obviously my file explorer here, and as we can probably see, and I'll just zoom in. We're running at like 3.9 meg for that CSS file. So this is by no means tiny at this point. Like, yeah, that's a pretty hefty CSS file we've got going on there. And it's not surprising. That's a lot of CSS we've just created. But that's like every single kind of, well, it's not actually believe it or not, this is not every single combination of CSS utility that Tailwind can produce. This is a sensible,
is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. This is a sensible default. I think Adam, and I hope I get his name right, Adam Waltham, who's the guy who kind of made Tailwind CSS. He talks about this. He's talked about this recently in terms of their new feature called JIT, which I'm going to show you as well in a little bit. And he basically said if you turn on every option in Tailwind CSS, you get a CSS file that's around 20 odd meg. And basically, if you try to develop locally with that, it literally slows the browser down. The browser literally lags loading all the CSS. So they've tweaked Tailwind to have sensible defaults. So this is a level that the browser can cope with and be really responsive and while you're doing it. But you can manually turn on any other stuff you need in that configuration file as well. So yeah, anyway, we've got our compiled CSS now. So this is great. The final thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a reference in my index.html. So this is the host page for my Blazor app to that compiled CSS file. So I'm just going to pop in a link here to that outputted CSS file. So I've got that now. Everything's in there. So fingers crossed, we go back over to the browser, we hopefully have something that looks a little bit nicer.
Yeah, that looks a little bit better already.
That looks a little bit better. It's definitely not perfect. We've definitely got some bits that are still missing here, but you know, it looks a little bit better. We've got our counter page and we can click our counter and that increments, and we've got this fetch data page which looks really rubbish, so we probably ought to do something about that. But yeah, most of it's okay. This is still a bit weird because that should say Tailwind, but we'll look at that in a bit as well because there's something we can do there. But you know, overall it's looking a lot better.
Got it.
So now we've got that done, let's kind of move down a bit and talk a bit about actually using Tailwind now to kind of style our app a bit. I'm not going to labor this too much because I think there's far more intricacies in how you kind of get it set up and working rather than actually just applying lots of utility classes. So I won't labor this too much, but we'll just have a run through of it. So to do this, I'm going to jump over to that fetch data page. So we saw that a second ago. Here it is. It looks pretty rubbish at the moment. This should be a nice table, and it's not. So let's go and see if we can improve that. So the first thing that I'm going to do up here is I'm going to just add in some styling for this header. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say the text here should be 4XL. I want it to be quite big because it's a heading. I want it to be have a bold font. And I also want to have a margin on the bottom of 4. Now, like I say, 4 doesn't mean 4 pixels or 4 rems or anything like that. It's part of Tailwind's sizing system, and it scales it at a set rate. So 4 will equate to something like, it will end up being something like 3.8 rem, and then 5 would be 4.2 rem, and it kind of scales kind of linearly, like in a sort of nice curve and things. But again, we can look at how we customize that in a bit. So that's kind of that bit. So we kind of add some styling to that header. So we jump back over. We'll see this will reload in a second. I'm not using .NET 6 here, by the way, so I haven't got the hot reload. But you can see here it's reloaded, and we've now got like a much better looking header on our app. So that's better. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to style this table, because at the moment it's just kind of a regular table that's not doing a lot. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start styling these headers. In fact, actually, no, sorry, I'm going to stick some styles on the table first. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm saying this table should auto scale based on what the content is. So the column should resize based on what's in them. That's what table auto means as a utility. It's the width of the table should be 3/5 of the width of the page. That's what this means. I'm going to say it needs a margin on the top of 4, and it's going to be, and this MX auto is to do with margins. So it's margins on the x-axis, so that's the horizontal axis, and auto basically means it's going to center it. It's going to auto apply margins left and right so that it sits in the middle of the page. So that's what's going on there. I'm then going to put some styles on these row headings. So these are, as you can see, relatively verbose. And this is kind of something that I think sometimes can scare people a bit with utility-based frameworks. They kind of see all of these styles going in, and it's like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of markup. But I'm going to, again, we're going to address a technique with this, with repeated kind of utility styling in a second. But just to whiz through this is basically saying each header is going to have a padding of 2. It's going to have a border on the bottom of 4. That border is going to be purple, and it's going to be 600 level of darkness. The text is going to be left aligned. It's going to be uppercased. It's going to be small text. And this tracking wider is the space between the letters of that text. So just adding a little bit of letter spacing on the words just to make it look a little nicer. So that's what's going on there. And then I'm just going to do the same with these cells. So all I'm going to do on each of these cells is just give them all a padding of 2, just to give them all a little bit of room to breathe, a bit of space. So if I save that now and we go back and we'll wait for this to reload, and hopefully this should look a hell of a lot better than it did or that it does right now. So cool. So there we go. We've got a much nicer looking table now. It's got a bit of room. Everything's a bit more spaced out. You can see that we've got that big purple border going on the bottom of our headings. They're all in that uppercase. They're all bold and stuff like that. And we've got a bit of padding around each of these. So this is good. This is looking a lot better. Now, the next thing I'll show you is something to do is like a hover effect, because that's something that that's something that makes pages feel a little bit more kind of interactive. I could sort of have, when my cursor goes over one of these rows, I could highlight the row my cursor's over so I can make it easier to read and things like this. So we can do all that with Tailwind really easily. So what I'm going to do is on this table row, I'm going to add a couple of classes, or I'm going to add a class, but it's got a modifier to it. So what I'm saying here is when the cursor is hovering over this element, apply a background that's green and it's 100 level of brightness. So 100 is quite bright, 900 is the darkest. So that every time my cursor hovers over it, I'm going to get a green background on that row. So if I save that, when this reloads this time, we'll be able to see that in action. There we go. And now when I hover over, I'm getting this green background. And this is where I think the real impact, is with Tailwind. Doing something like that, writing those properties into a CSS class manually can be a bit laborious. Just literally that one class, bang, a few seconds later, you've now got this lovely hover effect that's happening, and you've not had to do a huge amount there. So we've got that in there pretty easily. So I think hopefully what that's giving you a feel for what is how quickly you can build up a decent looking style using these utility classes. Now I know I'm kind of pasting in snippets of code there, but that's mainly because no one wants to sit here and watch me type out each individual class. But once you get used to those styles, you can really rapidly fire these through, which is really useful.
Sure. And so we got a question in the chat really quickly that I wanted to send over to you. And this one's coming in from YouTube. And the question pretty much is, so in case we have lots of generated CSS, does Blazor's server model efficiently send this over on demand on SignalR? So he's pretty much asking how the diffing works with Blazor server specifically versus just Blazor WebAssembly.
Yeah, definitely. The answer to that is probably yes. The algorithm and the compression that's used on the SignalR connection for Blazor server is ridiculously efficient. I mean, the job that the Blazor team have done with building that, I think, is very, very impressive. The speed and the size of the messages that go back and forth are very, very, very tiny. I think you very rarely see messages going back and forth over that SignalR connection more than 100 bytes. It's really, 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 really compressed. So I wouldn't expect you to see any issues with performance in Blazor server with doing generated Tailwind classes like this. I'm guessing specifically that question is about when you're using your C# logic in your Blazor component to control when these classes are applied, because these ones here, for example, they're all in that generated CSS file, so they wouldn't be going back and forth over the wire. The only scenario that would happen is if I had some logic where I said, well, I only want to apply these 3 sets of utilities when a variable is true. So, but like I say, it's very, very efficient when it's doing that. So yeah, that shouldn't be a problem.
Awesome. And then there's a lot of folks here saying how much they love this presentation so far. So we're gonna keep it going, right?
Cool. Well, I'm glad everyone's enjoying it. That's good. So what I'm going to do now is show you something, and I mentioned obviously obviously to Cecil, like when we were talking before, is this is something I decided to throw in without testing, because everyone likes to run untested code in a live situation.
It's not live if you don't do it.
Exactly. If it doesn't break, it's not live. So that what we're going to do now is I'm going to enable a feature in Tailwind, which I think a lot of people really like at the moment, which is dark mode. Everybody loves a bit of dark mode. So let's have a look at how easy it is to kind of add in dark mode, starting with Tailwind. So what you've noticed here is that, what you'll notice here in the Tailwind config is that dark mode is set to false by default. Now, part of that reason is because it's going to generate a load more classes, which increase the size of that app CSS file that's generated. So it's off by default, but we can turn this on. It's got two modes, media or class. Now, media is kind of probably the one you may want to do, which is it's going to, depending on who the user is and what their system default is set to, it's going to inherit that. So for example, my system here is set up with dark mode as the operating system default. So this is going to pick that up and it's going to enable dark mode automatically. If you want programmatic control over that, you can use class, and then you have to do a little bit of manual work in your app to toggle it on and off, basically. So you can kind of cover good scenarios there. But basically what we're going to do is replace this line here with this one here. So all we're doing is changing dark mode from false to media. So it's just going to inherit that. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to do another build because that's just going to rerun that build system again. And what we will try this out on, because that was the point I haven't really thought about where a good place would be to try this, is probably going to be on the body tag. And we could probably see if we can get like this background to go like a dark gray when it's dark mode and then white when it's like not dark mode. So let's have a go at doing that. So if I go to, I'm just going to do this because I noticed that probably didn't rebuild. So if I go in here, what I can do is say on my body tag, for example, I could say class equals, and I can just say dark, and that's kind of my prefix for saying apply this style if dark mode is active. So I can then say like, right, BG, and that can be gray, and I don't know, we'll go, I don't know, we'll say like gray 700 or something like that. So if I save that off now and we go back over to our, I will just need to do a build because that doesn't always get picked up. There we go. We'll let that go through. And then when this refreshes, oh, boo, it didn't work. So unless I sometimes do this, I may have spelt grey wrong. Is it grey? That way around? Aha!
Oh, there we go. That works.
There we go. It's just my bad spelling. So as I said, because my operating system, my browser and everything is set up here to use, like I say, use dark mode, you can see now that it's applied that style. Now, I'm not 100% sure if it's just the browser. So I think like if I went to settings here now and said on appearance, I want, oh no, I've already got set light mode here. So it is picking up from my actual Windows machine. So because I've got that set to dark mode, it's there. Now, I was just thinking actually, if I minimize that, just trying to think now where dark mode's set. Colors. There we go. Light mode. Back to here. Refresh. Oh, that's weird. I thought that should just pick that up. So I just want to double check my settings here. That's light. Not any caching going on. No. Unless I need, that might be what I need actually thinking about it. Let me try put that in now. and doing a rebuild.
Could be caching it too, so maybe you need to do like a hard reset.
Yeah, we'll see if this. Oh no, it's not having it. Oh, that's weird. But then this is what happens when you do untested demos. So that's kind of entirely on me. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to put that back to dark mode because it's like the light mode's burning my eyes. It's weird. It did apply a dark mode, which is it's kind of weird that it didn't then go back to the white. But you know, c'est la vie. I called it before I started, so you know I said it was going to be a dodgy demo, so it rang true. So now we've kind of played around with the kind of half working dark mode that we had. We'll get back to a bit of customization now. So we've kind of looked at everything so far with. Oh, someone's just said, I think in the chat, put BG white before the dark mode declaration. That could have been it actually. Maybe it was an ordering.
That's a good thought.
Yeah, that was fair play. So I've obviously showed a bit about like just using it directly. So how do you actually customize it? Because while you can do a lot with it out of the box, you probably do want to customize certain things as you go and things like that. So we're going to just add a variant into the Tailwind config. So what I want to do here is I'm just going to check that I've got the right bit of my demo. Yeah. So what I want to do is on this fetch data page, what I think would be really cool is on this table, every odd numbered row was styled slightly differently. It gave a slightly different background color. So this is something that, again, can be quite tricky to write when you write manual CSS. So again, Tailwind can make this quite easy for us. But we do have to do a little bit of configuration on this one. It's something that's not actually enabled by default. So in this variance extend object, I'm going to pop in this background color. And what I'm basically doing is saying I want to enable this odd pseudo element, which is a CSS pseudo element on the background color styles that are generated by Tailwind. So I'm going to do that. And let that rebuild and rebuild those classes. And then once I've done that, I can go back over to my fetch data page. And now I'm there, I'm going to go on to the table. I'm going to go on the table body here. Oh, actually, no, sorry, I don't want that there, do I? I want the table row. And I'm going to pop in this, class. So what I'm saying here is on every odd row, apply BG purple 50. Okay, so that's what that's doing. So if I save that and we go back over, hopefully when this refreshes in a second, we'll get some nice purple rows on every odd colored element. There we go. So you can see now we've got the kind of this light purple on every single odd element. Now, if you've ever had to do that, like writing that with manual sort of CSS properties and things, this can be a bit fiddly. I can never remember the syntax. I'm always Googling the syntax and stuff. So this type of stuff, again, really trivial with Tailwind. We kind of just enable it and then we can just use it. It's yeah, really useful.
Got it.
So another
I'm
thing,
guessing there's a lot of those little prefixes, right? Like, so you have hover, you have odd. So I'm guessing there's a lot of those little prefixes that you could just add semantically to add meaning to my CSS. So kind of like what you said, like it's a little bit more succinct for me to do it this way versus like the option that some other, CSS frameworks have.
Yeah, exactly right. So another thing we're going to do here as well is extend the color palette. So one of the things that's cool with Tailwind, it ships with a really awesome color palette. So if I just kind of jump back over here and reset this to a more palatable size, if we jump over to the documentation and go down a bit, we can see there's this colors section. Now this is the color palette that Tailwind ships with by default. So you see me talking about these color numbers. So you can see it ranges from 50, which is like the lightest shade, all the way to like 900, which is the darkest shade. So you can use these numbers to create like, they're really useful actually for when you're doing, wanting to create like accessible buttons and things where you want like colored buttons and getting a good contrast ratio, things like that. You can do like a really light colored background with a really dark color of the same color, and it will kind of work really well for accessibility and things like that. So having this huge array is really useful. They also have an extended version, which is down here, which is like even more, and you can enable all of these as well if you want to, but they're not there by default. So because again, this creates hundreds of variations for everything, so they're not turned on by default. But in this instance, we actually do want to turn one on, because what we want to do is have this Tailwind, the word Tailwind here, using the kind of teal that Tailwind uses. So we're going to turn that on in the configuration next. So in my Tailwind config file, first of all, I'm going to do an import up here. I'm just going to import those colors. So that's that full colored palette from Tailwind CSS. So I'm just going to bring that in here. And then once I've done with that, I can extend the theme, and I can just say, I want to extend the colors that Tailwind has. So there's two ways you can configure Tailwind. You can replace what's there, or you can extend what's there. So it's really useful in that regard. And what I'm saying here is I don't want to ditch any of the existing palette. I like that. I just want to add to it. So all the colors that were there before are going to stay there, but I'm also now going to have access to this cyan. So that's going to generate a load of utility classes based on cyan now. So I've added that into my configuration. So now I've done that, if I sort of just rebuild this, I've already, and let this go through like that. Cool. So I'll let this refresh. And there you go. We've now got Tailwind being put in cyan. I'd actually already put the utility class in on this one, but obviously it wasn't being interpreted properly because cyan wasn't added to the palette. So we've added that to the palette, and now we've got Tailwind showing up in kind of more of the Tailwind sort of teal color. So we can extend our color palette that way. You can obviously put whatever you want to in there as well. So this is using this is using the colors that we've imported up here, but you could as well just easily put hex colors in. So I can quite easily at this point put, I don't know, I can give a random name, so I can call it my red, and then I can put like some kind of like hash code in there, and that all works fine. So I can really customize this however I want to customize it.
That's nice. So you could essentially define your own colors if you wanted to. Exactly.
Yeah. You can do literally whatever you want to do with it. Totally define your own custom palette, ditch the existing one, or build on top of it. It's totally up to you. The other thing that we can do here, like I said, is it's got a built-in spacing system. So this is quite useful. I'll just shoot back to the docs for this. You've seen where I've put like things like margin, like MB-4, MB, so MT3. This is all using their built-in spacing system. So the spacing system, like I say, gives you these numbers that go up in value, but they kind of can relate to any measurement you want them to. So Tailwind ships with kind of sensible defaults for all of this stuff. So if I sort of scroll down to the bit of the docs that talk about margin and padding, for example, if I go into margin, you can see earlier we were talking about like a margin top of 4. So if we look at like what 4 means, 4 is like a margin of 1 rem. That's what the default is, but we can customize all this and we can tweak it and we can set it to whatever we want to set it to. So how do we do that? Well, basically, when we're in our theme extension bits here, we can just kind of extend the theme with more stuff. So I'm saying here, I want to extend the current spacing. I'm going to add some extra ones to it. So by default, out of the box, Tailwind goes up to a spacing number of, I think it's 96 is the highest spacing it has out of the box. So basically what I'm doing is adding 2 additional ones on top of that of 128 and 144. So by doing that, I'm giving them, I then say what particular measurement that then translates to for me. So 32 rem and 36 rem is what those 2 values would mean in my spacing system. So once they're in there, and I've built that, any utility that uses spacing will now have those 2 spaces as an option. So margin, padding, width, any of those types of things will now have that as an option to it. So if I go back to my like index.razor page, I can now go like empty dash, I can go like 128. And you can see now in the IntelliSense, it's appearing in my list of available utility classes because it's now been generated for me by that. Oh, not the one I wanted. By adding that extra configuration in. So if we go back over here now, let this quickly rebuild and refresh. And I'll go back to the home page. You'll see we'll now have a whacking huge sort of gap at the top above our header because that's putting that huge 32 rem spacing in. So like I say, you can customize this system as much as you want to. And I think that's, again, one of the really strong points of using Tailwind to build out your apps. I'm just going to get rid of that because that's pretty bad. Cool.
So we got a lot of folks in here that are asking about not only the customizing of it, but like now that you've customized all these styles and we have like these different options that are generated, how do we like bundle this down, right? Because I think initially when you showed us, the CSS file was like, what was it, 18,000 something like.
Yeah, it's 187,000 lines of code, and it was about 3.9 meg or something like that, I believe.
Yeah, so that's a lot of CSS, right? And obviously not what we want to ship. You know what I mean? Like how can we strip that down?
Yeah, and I think the important thing to point out here is we've enabled dark mode now. We've added in some more spacing, and we've added in some extra colors and background. If we jump back over to that file, look where we're at now. Right. So we're now at 7.4 meg. So you can see like how quickly that CSS file can like balloon when you and we've only turned on a couple of extra things here, so this can get really big. What I thought we'd do is I'd talk about two other little bits, and then we kind of loop back round to the sizing issue, and we'll deal with certainly the production bundling minification bit. I'm going to deal with right at the end, but I'm going to show you another feature of Tailwind which kind of almost makes that a null and void thing as well. So we'll get to that in a sec.
Okay.
What I thought we'd talk about next is because just like you, I asked on Twitter like if anybody had questions, and one of the ones that came up was around repeated styles, okay, and how basically how can I deal with like having these really long kind of chains of utility styles in my apps. Personally, I don't really have too much of an issue with this here, but what probably I do have more of an issue with is the fact that I've now got like 4 repeated sets of these things. So if I want to change this, it's quite laborious. Like I've got to change like each row and everything. It'd be far nicer if I could somehow kind of put them together a bit like a traditional CSS class would. The good news is I can do that, and I can still keep the kind of awesomeness of utility styling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over to that original file we created, that original style file we created. App CSS file we created with those Tailwind directives in it. And inside here, I'm going to add in, I'm going to add in a style. So I'm going to add in a regular CSS style here called table header. Okay. But I'm going to use another Tailwind directive, this apply directive. And then I'm just going to actually put that same list of utility styles that I had in my table there. I'm just going to put them in here instead. And what's going to happen is Tailwind is going to translate that line into a final CSS class for me. I'm not going to have to get involved in it. So I'm going to get the benefit of a kind of centralized class for this style, but without having to write any properties, manual CSS properties myself. I can still keep using that utility, which I think is, I love this feature. I think it's so cool. So if I go back to fetch data now, basically what I can do is I can sort of select all of this and get rid of it like so. And I can just replace it with that table header class that's been defined over here. So I've got my table header class now, and I can just use it like it was a regular CSS class. So if I come back, and we'll just let this finish reloading. And basically with this, if I jump over, you can't see any difference. Nothing's changed, because what I've done is I've still got the same styling. I've just moved where it's been applied. So if I right click on this and inspect and go in my browser tools, you can see now I've lost those utility classes here. I'm just using that single class that I had before. And what that's done is over here, you can see it's generated a class with all of those regular CSS properties in it, translated from those utility classes that I used with that apply directive. So I just think this feature is awesome. It's so cool because you get all that nice flexibility of utility styling, but when you do find a repeated style, you can just bundle it in a central place and then just reference it. And then if you do want to change that style for your app, you do it in one place, it affects everywhere that references it. So it's a really cool thing.
Now, super quick too, another question coming in from the chat. This one popping in from YouTube. Is it possible to define entire color palettes or perhaps apply depending on the system mode? So I'm guessing he's talking about, like, you showed us that Tailwind CSS, that config file. So I'm guessing that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, definitely. So basically you can literally do whatever you want in here. So as I mentioned a second ago, what I'm doing here is, because I put colors inside of the extend object, what I'm doing there is specifically saying I want to add this to the existing color palette. And I've defined a color here called cyan, and that relates to this cyan that's being imported from the Tailwind CSS colors package. Like I said to you, I can, or like I showed a second ago, I can just define my own name. So I could, like I said, I could my red, and then I can then just say, right, my red is going to be like this hex code, and I can then just create my own palette from there and do whatever I want to do, and that will be based on top of the existing one. Or I can move this colors, I can take it out of extend and put it directly in the theme object, and then it becomes the color palette, and it will ditch what's there already and only use what I've supplied. So like I said, it's totally flexible and down to what you want to do. So you can totally control it 100% yourself, or you can just add to what's there and sort of tweak it however you see fit. I think that covered that question, didn't it? I think.
Yeah, that should cover it. I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions. But yeah, that I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, so we've done this with the table head, and we've done that. One thing as well, I just probably want to point out is that you don't have to use kind of like the regular. You don't have to use these. You can use like regular like selectors as well, like CSS selectors, like you would do in any other style file. So I've used a class here, but I could also do like table, chevron, like tr or td, sorry, or whatever, or th in this case. What I can do instead is, like I say, instead of doing that, I could do this and say, right, if I've got a table that has a class of weather table, for each table header in that table, apply this style. So that all works as well. So basically what I just want to show there is that you don't just have to limit it to only CSS classes like that. You can still use selectors. So that all works, and that's good. Another thing you can do here as well is you can just style as well straight HTML elements. So like my H1s in this app are all using the same 3 combinations of utility styles. So again, I could do the same thing. I can say for every H1 element in my app, apply these styles, and then I don't have to apply them manually. I can just write my H1 tag and just get on with it and not have to keep repeating that code. So all the kind of regular ways you do this is still going to be supported. You can still do it. So yeah, I just want to show those 2 kind of bits as well and make that point really.
Right. Quick question coming in. I think I have the answer to this, but I'm going to make you answer it. Nicholas is asking, can you swap themes at runtime?
So like, as in like complete color palettes and everything I'm taking from that. So you could have like one set of colors for one environment and one set for another. That's the way I'm interpreting it.
I guess so. I mean, so I know a little bit earlier you showed how you could swap themes based on the like the system, right? Like, so whether it's
like
dark or light mode or whatever the case is. So can I have other ones? Can I have like distinct themes that I have, right? And then based on whatever is happening, can I say, I don't know, like this is an admin theme. So like the admin login is red, hypothetically, right? And then you logged in as a regular user, so your regular login is blue. You know what I mean? Or like something of that sort.
Yeah, so basically kind of defining your own like pseudo element piece. So like that hover colon. That's actually a really good point. Thinking about it off the top of my head, I actually don't know the answer to that. I would expect you probably can. But you can definitely, because this is this Tailwind config is a JavaScript file, you can just perform regular like logic around some of this. So you could also have like two versions of this. So you can have like a Tailwind config for dev and a one for staging and like one for production, and use a different one depending on what environment you're in. And that could contain then different styles or different configurations for your theme. So you could then you could have like a say I don't know, this is a bit abstract here, but like this color is cyan and that relates to a particular hex code. But you could then say, well, actually, where I say cyan in dev, I want this like hue of it, but in staging, I want a different hue of it, for example. And you could do it that way. But defining your own actual pseudo elements, like I said, I've not actually tried to do that before. That's a really good question. I'm going to take that away and have a look at that, because that actually could be really quite useful.
Yeah, that could be cool. And then I see some folks in the chat also talking about allowing the user to switch themes. So, you've gone to some sites and maybe like the top right corner has like a little drop down, and then you select option X, right, of available themes. I'm guessing you could probably do that, but would you need to still have multiple Tailwind config files, or could I do it with a single config file? You
may do. Like I said, I think I definitely would feel I definitely want to check up on this one, because I've definitely not tried to do this yet. Like I say, with the dark mode specifically, you can do that, and certainly the Tailwind docs actually describe a few ways that you could do that as well. And they talk you through how you can have what we saw, which was kind of the inherited one where we use media, or you swap it to class, and then you can then have that toggle. Like you see it on websites, don't you, where like toggle dark mode on and off, and you can do that, and you can build all that with Tailwind. And it's got they've actually got, like I say, an example of how to do that toggling in their docs. So that can definitely be done with dark mode.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's I mean, you can always use dark mode as a bit of a way of doing it as well. Like you could say like dark mode, and then because you're always saying is when dark mode's active, apply this particular style. Doesn't mean that actually has to be dark. Like it could just be you have a theme toggler and just use dark as the way of trigger the dark tag as the way of triggering that other theme. So you could do it a few ways, but I'm definitely looking into that other one though. That first way. Cool. So we're getting through stuff here. So I just want to show you quickly a plugin as an example of how you can then extend Tailwind to do more stuff that it doesn't do out of the box. So I'm going to do a text shadow plugin, because like text shadowing is quite hard, and I think shadowing anything with CSS is quite hard. Like it's quite a gnarly statement you have to write for the property to get shadows, and it's can be really hard to read and understand and things like that. So Tailwind provides a load of shadowing out of the box for like shadowing a div or stuff like that. But text shadowing is kind of like a different problem, and there's a plugin for that allows you to do that. So what I'm going to do is go back to the package.json file. I'm just going to add in another plugin. Let me go down to my extending, and I'm just going to pop this in. So this is a Tailwind CSS plugin called Text Shadow. So I'm going to pop that in there, and then I'm going to go into my Tailwind config, and I'm going to replace the plugin section. And what I'm saying in the plugin section is I'm going to require that particular package that I've just referenced in the package.json file. So that's kind of all I need to do now. That'll import it. Now, different packages can also let you do configuration. So this is one of them. You can actually tweak some of the shadow stuff. Other plugins, like, again, you can just be really, like, you really take full control of what they do and really tweak stuff. But I'm just going to show you a real kind of basic sort of implementation here. So if I do that, I'm just going to rebuild that, and that's just going to bring in the new NPM package. It's you can see just quickly, see that flying by, the NPM install running as part of that build target we created earlier. So that's all gone through, and it's rebuilt everything. So what I'm going to do is in the, I'll go back to the app very quickly. Reload. What we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of a text shadow on this Blazor word, because just to make it kind of stand out a little bit more. So in my shared folder, I've got my main layout. So this span here is that that word Blazor there. So I'm just going to go in there. I'm just going to add in so this is a utility class that's provided by that plugin. So text shadow XL. So I'm going to pop that in there. I'm going to save that. And then when this rebuilds, if we keep an eye out around that Blazor word, you'll see it will get a nice shadow behind it now, which will make it pop a little bit. So you can see there now, we've got that kind of text shadow going on behind. And I'll just zoom in. You can see it just makes it stand out off the page a little bit, makes it just feel a little bit more interesting, makes everything feel a little bit less flat and stuff. So it's a small thing, but when you're creating sort of more rich UIs and things like that, these little effects can really make a difference to users and kind of the look and feel of your application. So yeah, and it's cool to see, let's say, how you can then extend these features of Tailwind. And obviously, if it doesn't do something and there's no Tailwind plugin for it, you can always write your own as well, which is cool. But obviously, you need to know quite a bit of JavaScript there because it is all JavaScript based.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it adds more dimension to the text too. And I think when it comes to things like accessibility for a lot of people, being able to very clearly identify the text or have some more substance definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the extending part. Now, the last kind of few bits that I want to talk about. So there's a feature that got released recently, and I think it's actually technically still in preview for Tailwind, which is called JIT, which is just-in-time compiling of CSS. Now, this is a really interesting one because what we've been doing so far is we've been taking those 3 lines of Tailwind directives and generating that massive, huge CSS file that's ballooned to 7.5 meg now with all of those classes in it. Now, most of them we're not going to use. Our app is using an absolute fraction of the styles that have been generated, right? What JIT does is it will look at our app, and as we apply styles to our app, it will then regenerate our app CSS file with that new style that we've just added. So basically what happens is we only get the utility classes appear in our final CSS file that we're actually using in our app. Now, why this is really cool is a couple of things. Firstly, you could turn on every configuration available in Tailwind, and you will get a 0-sized CSS file until you actually use a utility, and then it will only add the one you use. So like I said earlier, you can't turn them all on by default because it would just kill the browser really with too much stuff. So that's really cool. It also enables some really interesting extra features that they couldn't do when they were just kind of pre-building these utility classes. So and I'm going to show you this in a second when I enable JIT. Instead of having to go into the config file now and create new spacing ranges and like I showed earlier, I can actually just do it directly when I'm creating the utility, when I'm writing the utility class in my HTML, and it will automatically generate it for me on the fly. So that is just such a cool thing, and I can chain stuff together I couldn't chain before and all this kind of stuff. So let me turn on JIT and it will make all of this hopefully come alive. So just to kind of recap, sorry, before I do that, this app CSS file at the moment, 7.4 meg, okay, with where we're at right now. So we're going to turn on JIT and see what happens. So to turn on JIT, I'm going to go in Tailwind config, and I'm going to pop in a few bits. So there we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is add in a couple of extra bits onto this module. So first of all, I'm going to declare that I want to use JIT mode with Tailwind CSS. That's the first thing I'm going to do. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to declare this purge array. Now, what purge CSS is used, or purge is used with post CSS. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at, we give it a list of all of the files in our app that use these utility classes. So in our case, it's going to be the index.html in the www root folder that hosts the app, the Blazor app. and then any of our Blazor components. So anything that's got a .razor extension on it could potentially hold utility CSS classes. Now, what's going to happen here is the JIT compiler is going to look through those lists of files and strip out all of the utility classes that we're using in them, and then make sure that they're the only ones that find their way into the final app CSS file. So one more time, just to recap, 7.4 meg for this app CSS file at the moment. So if I save that right now, and if I also then go over to my package.json file, I'm going to update this build script as well. So I've had to do, basically, I've just had to add in an environment variable here. So what I've done is I've added in this Tailwind environment, this Tailwind underscore mode environment variable, and I've set it to build, okay? And this is something that you need to do because that Tailwind understands what this means. It means basically do a one-off build using the JIT compiler. Tailwind does have a mode where it does a watch, but that kind of doesn't, we could do that. But because .net is also doing a watch and doing a rebuild, we kind of might as well just do these one-off rebuilds. It just kind of works a little bit better with the .net build system, and it kind of makes things a bit slicker. What I do want to point out, though, and this is a pain point for people, and I feel that pain because when I was trying to get JIT working for this demo, because I'd done it on a Mac and it just worked on my Mac. When I came to Windows, it didn't work. And I literally spent hours like trying to work this out. And people have told me it didn't work on Windows and things like this. The reason it doesn't is because the way we set node environment variables in Windows is different to how we do it on Linux-based OSs. So in Mac OS or on Linux, if I removed this first bit, I could just have Tailwind mode equals build and blah, 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 and it would just work. But on Windows, I'd have to use the set prefix on Windows to set a node variable. So instead of crossenv, I'd say set and then Tailwind mode. And that's how you do it on Windows. However, it might, where I work at Deployed, we work cross-platform. So I develop on a Mac, another developer develops on a Mac, another developer has a Windows box. We deploy to Linux servers. So we need stuff that works cross-environment. And there's a node package called crossenv that allows you to set environment variables regardless of the particular platform that you're building on at the time. So that's why I'm using this crossenv package down here. And that's what this crossenv bit is in the command. I could take this now and run this on a Mac and it would still work absolutely fine. I could run it on Linux. It would work absolutely fine. And obviously it's going to work on Windows because I'm now about to show you that. So that's probably a real key point. If anyone's tried to do this on Windows and failed, this might be why. So I just want to really highlight that one.
Yeah, that's a good point to share too, because I'm sure a lot of folks, like you might build on Windows, but then maybe you deploy on Linux or you run on something else. And the last thing you want to hear is, oh, it works on my machine, right? But it didn't work on like the production machine for whatever the case is. But, because the environments are different, we might have these types of scenarios.
Yeah, exactly right. So all we've done, we've done all that update and everything there. Now I'm going to save that. Now just going to do one more check. Still 7.4 meg. So let's do a build and see what happens.
Okay. So now you're doing a full like MSBuild build.
Yeah. So incremental build at this point, but it's going to run all of those 3 targets we created and it's going to run our full kind of JavaScript build system, if you like, at this point.
Got it.
Look at that, people.
Whoa, nice.
13K from 7.4 meg.
Nice.
JIT is so cool.
I like it.
It's so cool. What's really cool about this as well is that, and what I really like about the JIT system is that now we're working with the file that would be the same in production. So we don't end up with 2 files either. So we don't end up with a scenario where we're using loads of utilities in dev, but when we go to prod, something might have gone wrong with the purge, and now we've got a small file, but things don't work. This is actually the same as what would happen in let's say in production, and it's really quite cool. I think I saw someone on YouTube just say, "Can you show us the CSS file?" So this is the CSS file. And if you remember before, it's 187,000 lines.
Yeah, it was a lot of CSS.
It's now 610.
No, it's a couple hundred. Nice.
So you can see as well, look, that's that table header class that we created in our one using that apply directive. So you can see that's being translated now into the final CSS. And then you can see this has got basically a load of resets going on here. So this is all sort of a basic reset that's going on. And all the utility styles that we use from Tailwind will all get added to this as we use them within the app, and they'll all get kind of picked up as we go. So I'm just going to let that go through and let that go there. Now, what I did notice, and again, this is not overly unexpected at this point, I did notice sometimes I hit some caching issues with this. So sometimes it won't cache the styles. And I did find another problem, and it may have triggered this one, and it might have done it this time by the looks of it. And that is, when you're building through Visual Studio, it sometimes kind of plays havoc with the JIT system, and it doesn't always pick up the files correctly. And that usually seems to be because you're using it with IIS. So what's happened here is, if I go in that app CSS file, it kind of already had it. I should have probably called it out straight away. If you look, this is all the CSS reset stuff going on.
Yeah. And
then we've got our table header class, and we've got nothing else. None of those utilities that we've used in our app have been applied to this file. So it's not, basically what's happened is when it's run through the JIT and it's done this part of it, it's just not picked up those styles properly. And like I say, what I found after a lot of pain with this was that if you use the .NET CLI, which I do on a Mac exclusively pretty much, it doesn't happen. And what I did find was changing this to use Kestrel directly, that also seemed to sort the problem. So I really hope it sorts the problem this time. So
yeah, let's try and see what happens.
Over to Kestrel now, and let's run this and see what happens when we run it with Kestrel.
It's so funny you said that, because someone in the chat from YouTube is saying use a different browser, but now you're using a completely different web server.
I'm using I'm going completely different web server now, so I've really gone all the way out there on it. Okay, so this is struggling this time around, unfortunately. So it's not picked up those changes. I think it's probably fair to say I reiterate at this point, the JIT mode from Tailwind is still in preview.
Okay.
I definitely have left problems with this on my Mac. So I'm not hating on Windows and Windows VS. Absolutely.
No Windows shade at all, right?
No shade at all. But I definitely hit some problems with this while I was working. Oh!
What happened?
I've got 2 purges in. So before, I'm definitely not throwing shade on VS.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
100% there. That's my bad.
Okay.
Let's rebuild this again. And
there you are talking all this smack about IIS.
I was talking smack about VS. The VS team are going to come after me now with pitchforks and stuff, and like Windows, and oh no. So let's see what happens if we actually. I'm going to close that down before I go any further. So I'm going to close that one down as well. Let's just take a second here. We'll close down Kestrel. We'll get rid of that. I'm going to switch back to IIS because I was trashing IIS Express not working properly.
Do you need to do a rebuild, or you think you should be fine?
This should go through again. It should go through with this, and oh look, it's working.
No, it works. Awesome.
So nice. It turns out if as a developer you don't make a crucial error with your configuration, it turns out everything works fine. So let me just go like Mia Cooper to Visual Studio, to the IIS Express people. I love all of you. You're working amazing.
Please don't take away his MVP.
Please don't take away my MVP. Yeah. But cool. So anyway, now we're working again. If we go back over here as well, we can see over the network, if we just refresh this again, when all the various files come in, we have not got our things. Let me just do a hard refresh on this. You can see our app.css coming in over the wire now, 6.6K. So with the compression and bits and bobs, it's it's got dramatically smaller because we've been using this. So so that's a a huge benefit of using JIT, gives us more real world sort of example of what's going on. If we kind of come back over to our app now, you know, I said to you a minute ago about when I wanted to create new sizing and things, I had to go into Tailwind, configure that new size, and then rebuild, and it kind of generated this, right? This is where like JIT's like pretty cool. So what I can do instead is I can do arbitrary styling, right? So I can say I want a margin top, and then I use this square bracket syntax, and I can say I want a margin top of 111 pixels, right? So I literally just write that. I don't go and do any configuration. I save that. I wait a second, come back to my app. My app refreshes, and now if I go in here, I've got this margin top there, and if we go over to here, oh, look at that. We've got
nice.
A utility class that's been generated on the fly by the JIT compiler of 111 pixels because I arbitrarily said I want 111 pixels. Could be 112, could be 109, could be 7.
Sure.
I can make
any number that you decide.
Any number I want to put in there. I could use rems, I could use EMs. It doesn't matter. It's gonna build that for me on the fly, and that's another sort of really cool part of JIT because you can do these kind of on the fly things. Another thing that Adam Waltham does when he's got a video again on the JIT section of the documentation, he's got a video there that introduces JIT. And he actually shows you as well another feature of JIT, which I won't get into here, where you can chain loads of those kind of pseudo element styles. So you can say like, when you're hovering and it's dark mode and you're on a medium breakpoint and like, I don't know, it's Tuesday and it's 10 o'clock, apply this style. And it will just work it all out on the fly and things like that. So that's definitely worth checking out as well to kind of understand like the full kind of sort of utility of JIT. But yeah, so that's JIT compiling, and that's definitely cool. So we're just going to start to wrap up here now. So I'm going to kind of finish off by talking about how you would then move this to production, because while we've got this tiny CSS file at the moment, it's actually still could be better because it's not minified or anything at the moment. It's just sort of all these styles, but it's still sort. So just to kind of recap where we are at the moment. So we go back to our currently compiled CSS. It's 17K at the moment. Okay, so we're still talking like tiny amounts, but let's see what else we can do with this. So I'm going to talk about how we can deal with a release setup. So I'm going to go over to my package.json, and I'm going to add in a new script here to my script section. So let's do that. So what I've done is I've added in a new script here called build CSS release. I'm using cross-end, but I'm using a node environment variable. I'm saying the node environment is going to be production this time. And this is going to tell Tailwind CSS that I want a production build. So strip out any utilities that I'm not using. But because we've already got JIT compiled with that purge setup, that's kind of already happening anyway. So we don't have to do anything else here. And then after that, I'm still running the same command that I had before, post CSS, passing in our app CSS from styles, and it's going to output one over here. But this time round, I want to do a bit more. I want to minify it because, you know, going to production, I want everything as small as it can possibly be. So what I'm going to do as well while I'm here is I'm going to come back to this in a second. I'm going to jump back over to my CS proj file before I go any further as well. So in my CS proj file, you remember from earlier, we set up this build target, and it was just going to run our dev build command whenever we built our app. Well, I'm going to replace that. So I'm replacing it with two commands this time, and I'm putting a condition on them, which is another thing we can do with MSBuild, which is cool. So what I'm saying is when the configuration is debug, then run my build CSS dev command. When the configuration is release, run my build CSS release command. Okay, so that's going to call either one of those scripts I've defined in my package JSON, depending on whether I'm building for production or release, or whether I'm doing local development. So that's what we've had to do in the project to make it work with our build system. So talking about minification, I'm going to add in another package here for that from NPM. So this package is Nano CSS. If you've done any bundling minification with JavaScript build systems, you probably know Nano CSS. It's quite popular, and it's just going to minify. It's going to minify what we do. It hooks in with Post CSS really well. So what I'm going to do is go back to my post CSS config, which we had right at the start, which we kind of said we didn't need to do a lot with. I'm just going to kind of replace it. And I'm going to replace it with a slight enhanced configuration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the environment variable into the configuration. And for CSS Nano, I'm going to say if the environment is production, then I'm going to say preset default. What this essentially does is say minify the file. That's basically what we're saying here. If it's not production, then don't do anything. Okay, so that's what is happening there. So I've done that. That's all in place. So you can see up here, I've got my release configuration set up, my 17K file. And if we just double check my app CSS, you can see it's definitely not minified at this point. So now I've got my release build set. Let's build the solution.
And, you know, as you're doing that, I'm actually surprised that minification isn't built into one of these frameworks already. Like, I'm surprised you have to install another thing to do it. Because it just seems like a common use case that I just kind of expect to be there in the box now.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an interesting one because I think certainly my feel from my experience and the work, sort of the JavaScript community involvement I've had is that it's very much a case of like, don't repeat yourself. It's like if there's a tool that does it and it does it well, instead of kind of remaking the wheel, as it were, you just kind of point people at that tool and tell them like, do the cool thing with my framework and then go to this other thing to do that other thing because it does it really well, rather than me repeating it. And I think that's not good or bad. It's just I suppose different communities taking different approaches. I think with .NET, we tend to always like to have everything happen in one place. I mean, one of the reasons Visual Studio is so popular is because it's so productive, because you can literally do everything. I can, connect that to my GitHub repo. I can clone my repo. I can make my changes. I can create my pull request. I can commit it, and I'd never have to leave my IDE. And that's got a lot of benefit to it. But that does mean that it has to be able to do all these things in it. There are other tools that, sometimes can do a dedicated job really well, and you don't because you stay in one tool or whatever. So I think it's just a difference with communities where, like say, JavaScript just is used to having lots of different things that do these, and you plug them all together. And I think that's possibly where when .NET developers look at JavaScript, it looks much more chaotic because you have to know about these packages and then you have to know how to wire them together. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just difference in approaches, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
But we can see here, we've got a minified file. So we're now down to one line of CSS. I mean, it's a pretty long line, admittedly, but you can see that it's all been compressed and put together. And that nano CSS has got levels of compression you can use. So it can sort of make things even smaller if you need it to. If we go over to our kind of litmus test and go back to my file system, we're down to 9K now.
Nice.
So we've created
we were at 7 megabytes before, so now it's down to 9K.
7.4 meg down to 9K. So you can see we're definitely using, we've definitely obviously got JavaScript build system. We've got a bit of Node going on in there, but I really hope with this, I've showed to people that it's not that scary to mix the two worlds, and they can really work together in unison. I definitely don't hate JavaScript. I've spent a lot of time using it, so it's I've got some fond memories of it. It definitely does some weird things as well, but it's part of the quirkiness. But it shouldn't be something that should be completely avoided. These tools are really good at what they do, and I think it's for the little bit of configuration we have to do. I think it's definitely worth the effort.
We've been here for a super long time, and we've folks have been with us the whole time, kind of just like absorbing all this information. And what I think is great too is just because the session is recorded, people can always go back, because I think you gave a really comprehensive view of what it takes to set it up, from like the MSBuild task to like some of these different options that we could tweak. And then now we ended up in production, which I'm sure is what everyone wants to know, right? Like, how small can I get the CSS? Because again, the faster our pages load and render, like the better it is for, business in general. So a couple folks in the chat have been asking about this sample. They want to know if they could download this somewhere, or maybe you did this before and you could get it off a Git repo somewhere. Do you have this somewhere that we could use or share with people?
I will. I've got this. This is on my GitHub at the moment, but I think off the top of my head, the repo is still private. I'll make it public. It's not private for any particular reason other than while I was screwing around with it. But there'll be a basically there'll be a repo. What I'll do is I will pass you the link. That will be the address of the repo. I'll just make sure I've tidied it up before I make it public. So I'll do that. I'll basically leave it how it is now with everything turned on rather than having to manually go in and paste in my code snippets. But I'll get that done sort of straight away afterwards, and that should become public pretty soon after we're done.
Great. And so what I did was I went ahead and shared not the repo, but I shared folks your GitHub account. So people can follow you on GitHub if they wanted to, and then also make sure they kind of just pay attention to see like as you're doing things, and then they might be able to find out whenever you decide to post that.
I'll pick. What I'll do as well is I'll ping a tweet out as well. So if you're not following me on Twitter, that's my cheesy way of getting you to follow me, and I'll ping out a link to that repo on there. So, I mean, mainly this is it. I mean, I think the only other thing I was going to shout out is that Visual Studio is not the only way to do this stuff. I mean, one of the cool things with .NET now is it's cross-platform and it's cross-IDE and all this kind of stuff. So, Tailwind has got some really sort of cool bits for it for Visual Studio Code as well, because Visual Studio Code tends to be more of the home environment for a lot of the front-end world. So, if you do want to use Visual Studio Code, you can, and there's actually a official Tailwind CSS plugin here that gives you really good IntelliSense for all of their utility classes and things like that. And it also helps you with the configuration. So it will do it understands the Tailwind config, and it will color code it, and it will give you kind of help with autocomplete on doing stuff here. So you can see you've got all this built in. So that's something that's definitely worth it. And this is definitely, I'd say, the most kind of Tailwind friendly environment in VS Code, because I know that the creators of Tailwind live and breathe in Visual Studio Code, because all of their demos are in Visual Studio Code and all their live streaming is in Visual Studio Code. So that's definitely like a really premium environment for it. JetBrains Rider as well, if you use that, there's a Tailwind CSS plugin for that as well. I use that a lot on my Mac. So there's a Tailwind CSS plugin that, again, helps with IntelliSense for all of the utility classes there and everything like that. So no matter what IDE or editor you want to use, there's kind of a way into it with .NET and with Tailwind. So yeah. But anyway, I think that's everything. I think I've exhausted.
Awesome. You're probably pretty tight. I know it's late where you are on your side of the world. On my side, it's just about dinner time. So I think it's time for us to let these folks go. Again, like you mentioned, if folks want to follow you, they could go check you out on Twitter at Chris_Sainty. I also shared your GitHub repo. So and I believe it's also the same thing, just that, with GitHub, there's no underscore. But if folks want to follow you on Twitter, follow you on GitHub, you'll be posting the repo soon. And again, if folks want to learn a little bit more about Tailwind CSS and those types of things, go ahead and message Chris, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to try to help you answer your questions, or at least direct you to the folks that could give you an answer if he doesn't have it himself.
Absolutely, definitely.
Cool. So with that being said, thank you all so much. Hope you enjoy your night, your evening, your morning, wherever you are, or whatever it is, wherever you are. And we'll hope to see you again next week for another episode of On.NET. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.